Now, this is an example I need to get everybody to really get a handle on. If you have a closed society, like imagine the colonists in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and you have 2,000 paper dollars that are absolutely, truly connected to silver dollars. You have 2,000 silver dollars in the warehouse, 2,000 paper notes. I have a gold watch in my wrist or on my pocket, and I want to sell that to you for 200 of these finite dollars. Okay, if I sell that watch and I get $200 back, 1/10 of the total amount, what happens when I learn that there are 2,000 more dollars or more paper notes in circulation without more silver being placed into that? Think about it. What really happens is this. My intrinsic value, my purchasing power of those bills and my watch value, I lost 1/2 of my value because I've doubled the increase. The money in circulation without having value has cut my purchasing power in half. Conversely, what happens if the bogus paper money appeared before I sold the watch and I knew about it? What would I do when I want to sell that watch? It's not worth $200 anymore. It's worth $400. It's doubled my value. But if I know about it, then I can make the right decision. This is, again, the purpose of this presentation today, is to let you know what's really happening in the financial markets so that you can be aware and get a heads up on to position yourself so that you don't lose the value of the money that you may have in the bank right now. Okay, boom and bust cycles actually do abound, ladies and gentlemen, with such a paper money system in the colonies from 1700 to 1750. Truly smart merchants in the know and tied to government officials, they could tell when new money was coming out. They were informed. They were given the heads up. And so they positioned themselves in the marketplace to become truly wealthy. And that's where the first big old money families came from back east, ladies and gentlemen. The term old money comes back to this time where they were able to understand the issue of these trade bills and trade notes. The merchants that were shrewd and understood this positioned themselves so powerfully they became fantastically wealthy in early history of America. Also, it became readily apparent that with over 2.5 million government bills circulating, that the Spanish silver coins, just like in my example, would really get a premium in price. And that's what was happening, you see, with the trade between the French to the west and the Indian nations, the Iroquois, the Mohawk, etc. By 1750, the free market price of silver, believe it or not, was actually trading at times as much as 10 times higher than paper notes. This is the reality of life in America in 1750 in the colonies. In less than 60 years, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and leading the other colonists from Maine to the Carolinas, had turned its promise to fully repay in specie. The term specie means gold and silver coins, into a total and complete farce. Its notes were now trading at 90% less than their face value. This is in the year 1750. But see, what happens when the bubble bursts, it began to burst back in 1750. When you got trading partners that have relied on promises of these paper notes, the French, the Indians, to a lesser degree the Spanish, that sometimes precipitates hostilities. And isn't that just exactly what happened? King George II of Hanover takes action at this point. He had to. Finally realizing that the disruptions of trade and productivity that such fiscal irresponsibility was causing in his colonies, King George II, now get this, I want you to look at his official title, and I want you to, this is parenthetical. He's called, his title is King of Great Britain and Ireland, Duke of Brunswick-Luneburg, Hanover, Germany, where he was born, and Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elect, Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elect, Lector of the Holy Roman Empire. Where does that come from? The Holy Roman Empire. What's King of England who was born in Germany, in Hanover, Germany, not even born in the United Kingdom? How does he get this title of Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector? This is beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'll just tell you, ladies and gentlemen, look at the Treaty of 1213, and you'll see something really interesting happening. The monarchs of England were forced into a treaty with the Vatican, in Italy, and the Vatican owned the British Islands by treaty in 1213. So the King and Queen of England became the Prince Elector and Arch-Treasurer of the Holy Roman Empire for that reason. All right, so King George II, this was his official title. He took the crown in 1727. He died in 1760. By official decree, he made it law. He outlawed the issue of any further currency in the colonies, not 100% backed by gold and silver. So when this official decree comes out from King George II, what happens? The governors of the colonies, enforcing it by British redcoats, by Hessian soldiers to enforce this monetary act. What happened then? The French were suddenly holding thousands and thousands of notes that were suddenly worthless because now they couldn't be redeemed for anything unless they had gold and silver. So the ripple effect against the trading partners of the colonies was massive. The king's agents, the governors of the time, refused to honor any exchanges, especially with the hated French and the Indian allies. Yep, you know history, ladies and gentlemen. War was declared just right soon after this 1851 declaration. Hostilities became commonplace against British interests in northern New England, especially along the Ohio western frontier, and the so-called French and Indian War broke out in 1754 and lasted until the year 1763. 9 years of warfare all along the frontier and into the colonies of America. Now, war is expensive, especially when you have to hire mercenaries to come and fight. The King George, he was again of German descent. His dealings with the Rothschild Bank, Mr. Bauer, who changed his name to Rothschild, they brought a lot of trained soldiers from Bavaria, from Germany, from the House of Hesse. They were called Hessian soldiers. So these mercenaries were basically the fighting force under King George. So George brought these soldiers under the British colors, and they successfully concluded on Europe and also in an American continent the French and Indian War. The final bill was presented to George III, the son of King George, in 1766. It was quite a large bill from the House of Hesse for all their Hessian mercenaries, all the ones lost. A Hessian soldier was killed back then. There was a bill sent to the king for the death of that Hessian soldier. So King George III, he said, well, this is my father's war, and look, it's the colonies that did this because of all of their funny money going out there, really. That's what caused the hostilities. So George III, without representation of the colonies, he declared a series of new taxes to pay for the cost of the French and Indian War. Now, the new taxes were soon imposed, and of course, you know the American Revolutionary history. These taxes were violently opposed, and war broke out. After the Treaty of Paris that ended the War of French and Indian War in 1763, we see that Spanish territorial gains were massive. The Spanish gains were all now in yellow. The French, okay, lost a lot. The Great Britain now extended clear into Ohio, and basically the Mississippi River was the boundary. But the Spanish now owned all area west of the Mississippi. Now, at this time, we have some of our founding fathers. We know of Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson actually wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776. Many people listening to this video, of course, read the Declaration of Independence. It's incredible words, are timely, and we have to give credit again to the author of that. The writer was Thomas Jefferson. He was clearly one of America's greatest statesmen, clearly one of the deepest thinkers America's ever had, and I would like to also emphasize he was a deeply spiritual man with a deep testimony of Christ. America was founded on Christian principles, ladies and gentlemen, but Thomas Jefferson was even deeper as far as understanding spiritually what America needed to become great, what America needed as far as a basis of finance. And so Thomas Jefferson wrote many things. Let me just give you this quote. I think it's wonderful. He says, "Free government is founded in jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with our power." This quote is really important as we look at the future in our finances, ladies and gentlemen. Jefferson wrote, quote, "If we run into such debts as that we must be taxed in our meat and in our drink, in our necessaries and our comforts, in our labors and our amusements, for our callings and our creeds, as the people of England are, our people, like them, must come to labor 16 hours in the 24, and give the earnings of 15 of these to the government for their debts and daily expenses. And the 16 being insufficient to afford us bread, we must live as they do now on oatmeal and potatoes. Have no time to think, no means of calling the mismanagers to account, but be glad to obtain subsistence by hiring ourselves to rivet their chains around the necks of our fellow sufferers. And this is the tendency, Jefferson writes, of all human governments. A departure from principle in one instance becomes a precedent for a second, that second for a third, and so on. To get this, the bulk of society is reduced to mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. And the forehorse of this frightful team is public debt. Taxation follows that, and in its train, wretchedness and oppression. See, Jefferson understood the spiritual basis of freedom, of free government, as a Christian gentleman, and deeply spiritual in his personal writings and papers. Flat out amazing gentleman. His depth of understanding of how important it is to have a sound basis, a sound financial basis for any form of government. So Jefferson really is a hero of American history. He's a hero of mine, and we can learn so much today from going back and understanding Jefferson's principles. These principles do not change over time. Just like the message in the Bible, just like all truths, ladies and gentlemen, they are always timeless. They remain honest and true today, and I submit that's exactly what Jefferson understood back then. So, when pondering the words of Jefferson over 200 years ago, consider these basic facts. These are sobering facts. Again, this is where it's controversial. But ladies and gentlemen, if every citizen of America were today to pay 100% of their gross income, not their net income, their gross income, to the federal government, it would not be enough to even cover half of the annual interest on the national debt. Is that sobering? The U.S. national debt is owed to who? To the Rothschild International Banking Cartel. The Rothschild cartel was there when Jefferson was writing his papers. It hasn't changed. The enemy is still the same. The U.S. government declared bankruptcy in 1933 at the depth of the Great Depression. If you look at the paperwork on that, ladies and gentlemen, the receivers for the corporation called the U.S. government, the receivers were in fact agents of the central bank of the Rothschild, the Bank of England. All right, here's Jefferson on banking again. Here's some of his more quotes. And he understood this from a deeply Christian viewpoint, ladies and gentlemen. He said, quote, "The central bank is an institution of the most deadly hostility existing against the principles and form of our Constitution. I am an enemy to all banks discounting bills or notes for anything but coin. If the American people allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." And then he said, "Banking establishments are more dangerous to this republic than standing armies." And finally, quote, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution taking from the federal government their power of borrowing." If only we'd listened to Jefferson 100 years ago. Are Americans homeless today? This picture's absolutely evidence. There's over 2,500 individuals. This is in Fresno, California. This is a homeless shanty town. These are springing up all across America, ladies and gentlemen, and they're getting more and more people. Oprah Winfrey just did a special on this. She visited the homeless shelter there in Fresno. Let's look at the U.S. Constitution, ratified and completed in 1787. Keep that date in mind, 1787. Article 1, Section 8 of the body of the Constitution. This is not an amendment. This is the basic body of the U.S. Constitution. Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin. Regulate the value of our coin as well as foreign coin. Article 1, Section 10 states that no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So the states are ordered by the Constitution not to make anything but gold and silver coin a tender. Note there is no such prohibition against Congress or any other delegated power to make anything legal tender. Congress was originally understood to have no power to make anything legal tender outside of federal territories. In Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2. But in 1868, the Supreme Court, which was packed by President Ulysses S. Grant, who, by the way, Grant represented the money interests by blood of the Rothschild. His wife and family were bloodlines of Rothschild. In the so-called legal tender cases, allowed Congress to make paper currency issued by the U.S. Treasury backed by gold, legal tender on state territory. This is a precedent that remains controversial to this day because the courts now allow paper currency that are just backed by nothing at all to be considered legal tender. So after the Constitution was ratified in 1787, the United States Coinage Act was passed and ratified, basically clarifying the role of the Constitution in providing for the money. The 1792 Coinage Act was authored by Jefferson with Alexander Hamilton helping out, writing it. I have a copy here. This is an actual photocopy of, and the Congressional Record of the Coinage Act of 1792. It basically sets out the form of legal money. You got eagles, which are gold, half eagles, quarter eagles. Eagles worth $10, half eagles $5, quarter eagles $2.50. Dollars, $1 value, 371 4/6 grain of pure silver. Okay, so that's the standard. The dollar or unit is $1, and it's the grains of silver that makes it valuable. And on down the line, the silver going down to the dime, half dime, the cents, penny weights became known as pennies, just 17.1 grams of copper, and half pennies. What do we need half pennies for when pennies are so worthless right now anyway? The point is, if you have true value and a system where scarce coins, where scarce precious metals are in existence, a half a penny will buy a loaf of bread. That's what they were doing in the colonies back then. A half penny would buy a lot of food. If you had a dollar or even an eagle, you were pretty wealthy in the early 1800s. What about today, ladies and gentlemen? This is a little graph and chart showing the price of commodities. This is taken from the Dow Jones commodity average. Starting in the year 2009 to the end of December 2010, look at the yellow line, copper. It started out at a baseline. Now it's 170% of where it was just 2009. Copper is a base metal. We'd like to have a bunch of copper pennies right now. They're extremely valuable. Look at corn. Look at silver. Look at the price of silver. You got copper on the top. You got green being the silver. 130% increase since 2009. The commodities are going crazy, and I'll explain to you why that is. Did you know that this little act of 1792, the Coinage Act, it set up strong quality control measures. The Secretary of the Treasury and his staff had to post a very, very large surety bond for many, many thousands of dollars to guarantee that they wouldn't mess up their job. The audits that the Founding Fathers put in place, quality control measures, each mass of gold and silver that was brought in and struck into the coins, the assay offices guaranteed that they would set aside samples under lock and key. Each year on the last Monday in July, each and every year, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Secretary and Controller of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, and the Attorney General were by law required to come in and randomly assay these coins. And guess what? If the coins did not meet these established standards, if there's any deviation whatsoever but the norm, the officers were immediately disqualified from office. And guess what else? As specified in Section 19, the penalty for fraud or embezzlement by officers or employees of the mint or of debasing or making the currency to be of less weight or value. Debasing means putting garbage metals into the coin. Put garbage metals in. If you were found to have done that, the penalty was death. It's right here in the article. Jefferson and the boys didn't mess around with this. It was capital punishment if you messed around with these coins. Question is why? I submit the Founding Fathers knew full well that debasing the currency was indeed a most profound act of high treason. As Jefferson declared so profoundly. You've got to read Jefferson's papers to understand why he felt so strongly about this and why the penalties under the Constitution and the U.S. Code for treason reads exactly like the penalties for debasing the coinage. Same penalties. Capital punishment, death. Our last really honest president, in my opinion, John F. Kennedy, understood all this. And let me just quote you some of his speeches that I have in my library. He appeared before Columbia University, and he gave a most eye-raising speech. He said, quote, "For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, in infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. This conspiracy, he said, is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed. It conducts the Cold War, in short, with the wartime discipline no democracy would ever hope to wish to match." To this speech, who was one of its most prime dissenters? John Kennedy himself was obviously a dissenter. Its dissenters are silenced, almost prophetic. Did you know, ladies and gentlemen, again, President John F. Kennedy spoke these words to an audience at Columbia University, and later on in a press conference identified that this conspiracy, this primary goal, to debase the current America. Jefferson understood this as well. If you're going to come in the back door and you're going to come in as a wolf in sheep's clothing, they're going to try and then erode the foundation of a free government, which is as Jefferson said, you build a house on either a rock or a sandy foundation. And if you erode away that rock, you really have no house any longer. Shortly after giving this speech, Kennedy issued Executive Order 11110, which clearly authorizes the U.S. Treasury for once again to print what is called sound money, which is certificates pegged entirely to silver and nothing else. And this was in direct competition with the face of what he called the monolithic conspiracy, known as the Federal Reserve Bank, ladies and gentlemen. Just a few weeks later, Kennedy was killed. Do you know that Lyndon Johnson's first official act after taking the oath of office on Air Force One was to sign another executive order revoking EO 11110. And of course, just 18 months after he became president, he signed the clearly unconstitutional Coinage Act of 1965, effectively and formally debasing and devaluing the U.S. silver dollar.